She was a single mother, responsible, quiet, devoted to her son. She left a hospital parking lot to get her car and vanished. No signs, no witnesses, no return. Then the phone call started. The voice knew things only the killer could know. This is the case of Dorothy Jane Scott, and 44 years later, we still don't know who took her or why. May 28, 1980, Anaheim, California, Dorothy Jane Scott was 32. She worked as a secretary for a store that sold psychedelic gifts. Very 70s. That night, she drove two coworkers to the emergency room. One had been bitten by a black widow spider. She stayed with him until he was discharged around 11 p.m. She told her coworkers she'd bring the car around front. They never saw her again. Minutes later, her car sped out of the parking lot, headlights off. They thought she might have had an emergency, but Dorothy never made it home. And the next day, her car was found burning in an alley, abandoned and empty. The mystery deepened when Dorothy's family began receiving phone calls. They started almost immediately after her disappearance. A man with a cold, calm voice would say, "I've got her." Or, "Is Dorothy home?" Sometimes he said he'd killed her. Sometimes he claimed she was still alive. He knew details that hadn't been made public. What she was wearing, where she'd been that night. The calls came for years, always to her parents' home, always when her mother was alone. Police tried tracing them, but the caller never stayed on the line long enough. He was careful, and he was never caught. For 4 years, Dorothy was a missing person. No trace, no body, no answers. Then in August 1984, a construction crew discovered charred human remains in a remote area of Anaheim Hills, just 13 miles from where she disappeared. A turquoise ring and a wristwatch confirmed what her parents feared. It was Dorothy. The cause of death? Undetermined. The remains were too decomposed. Her bones had been there for years. And even after that, the calls continued. Dorothy had told family and coworkers she'd been getting strange phone calls in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. A man claiming to love her and threatening to kill her. She didn't know who he was, but he said he watched her every day. Many believe she was stalked by someone she knew. Perhaps a customer at work, a distant acquaintance, a man obsessed. But there was never a solid suspect. No arrest, no confession, just a burned car, a terrified family, and a killer who enjoyed the silence. To this day, the case remains open. Dorothy Jane Scott left behind a son, just 4 years old when she disappeared. He grew up without answers. Her parents died never knowing who was behind the calls or why their daughter was taken. Her story is one of modern evil, obsession turned deadly, justice denied by time. She was cautious, she was kind, she deserved safety, she deserved justice. And somewhere out there, someone still knows the truth. He answered a knock at his front door and never got back up. One shot, no robbery, no suspects, no justice. Frank Augentie was a family man, a hardworking contractor, and someone wanted him dead. To this day, no one knows who pulled the trigger or why. It was March 13, 1982, Staten Island, New York. A quiet evening just after 10:30 p.m. Frank Augentie was home with his wife and 2 young daughters when someone came to the door. He opened it, exchanged a few words, then a single gunshot echoed into the night. His wife found him on the porch, bleeding. He'd been shot point blank in the chest. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. Frank Augentie, just 33 years old, was dead. And in that single, sudden act, his entire world and his family's was shattered. Police found no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. There were no enemies anyone could name. Frank had no criminal background, no known threats, just a business, a young family, and a future. Witnesses mentioned a car speeding away from the scene, but there were no fingerprints, no weapon, no usable surveillance. It seemed calculated, targeted. Someone came there that night with one mission, to kill Frank Augentie and vanish. And they succeeded. His wife and children were left with grief. Investigators were left with silence. Why was Frank targeted? Was it personal? A professional grudge? A case of mistaken identity? Over 4 decades later, those questions still hang in the air. His daughters, now adults, continue to search for answers. The case remains open, but cold. No arrests, no closure. Just memories and the ache of knowing a good man's life was stolen in a moment of cowardice. Someone knows what happened on that porch in 1982. And until they speak, The name Frank Augentie remains not just a victim, but a question still waiting to be answered. She left a beauty salon around 6 p.m. and was never seen alive again. Her car turned up the next day in a hospital parking lot with her body in the trunk. She'd been strangled. Her killer was careful, calculated, and fast. And though police had a suspect from the start, they never made an arrest. This is the unsolved murder of Deborah Atrops. It was November 29, 1988. Deborah Atrops was 29 years old, living in Tigard, Oregon. She was a young mother, recently separated from her husband, and navigating the difficult balance of co-parenting and starting over. That evening, she dropped off her 8-month-old daughter at her estranged husband's home in Sherwood for a scheduled visit. After that, she went to a beauty salon in nearby Tigard. She left the salon shortly after 6 p.m. She never made it home. Her friends and co-workers were immediately concerned. Deborah wasn't the kind of person to disappear without a word. She was responsible, communicative, and always showed up for her daughter. By the next morning, she was reported missing. The following day, Deborah's car, a black 1976 BMW, was found parked outside a local hospital in Tualatin, a few miles from where she was last seen. Inside the trunk was Deborah's body. She had been strangled, likely with a cord or rope, and stuffed into the trunk with care. The car showed no signs of forced entry. Her purse and belongings were missing. The medical examiner estimated she had been killed just hours after she left the salon. Police now had a murder on their hands, but few clues. Who killed Deborah? And why leave her car at a hospital? From the start, suspicion centered on one person, Deborah's estranged husband, Edward Atrops. Their relationship had been rocky. They were in the midst of a contentious divorce, and custody disputes had grown bitter. Deborah had also confided in friends that she feared for her safety. Edward was the last person to see Deborah alive when she dropped off their daughter. He claimed he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He said he never left his home that evening, but investigators noted some strange behavior. First, Edward waited nearly 24 hours before reporting Deborah missing, even though she never came back to pick up their child. Second, police learned he had access to the type of cord believed to have been used in the strangulation, materials from his job. But despite all the circumstantial signs, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murder. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no direct tie to the crime scene. And so, he was never charged. The case quickly went cold. Police continued investigating leads, but they always circled back to Edward. Yet without more evidence, they couldn't make an arrest. Over the years, Deborah's case faded from headlines, but never from the hearts of those who loved her. Her daughter grew up without a mother. Friends kept asking, how could this happen? Why was no one held responsible? In 1990, police publicly named Edward as a suspect, but again, reiterated that they didn't have enough to arrest or convict him. He continued to live in Oregon. He remarried, built a new life, but Deborah's murder stayed with him, and with everyone who remembered that cold night in 1988. In 2021, the case gained renewed attention thanks to advancements in forensic testing and public interest in cold cases. Detectives re-examined old evidence and looked again at timelines, phone records, and statements. Still, no new charges have been filed. But what they do have is a strong theory that Deborah was killed shortly after leaving the salon, that it was someone she knew, and that her murder was likely driven by control, anger, and fear. To this day, her murder remains officially unsolved. Deborah Atrops was a daughter, a mother, and a woman trying to start a new life. Instead, hers was taken, silently, violently, and without justice. More than 3 decades later, her killer has never been held accountable. But time does not erase the truth, and someone out there still knows what happened. It's not too late to speak up, not too late to bring justice for Deborah. He was just 17, bright, funny, a student, a son. One moment he was walking home, the next he was gone. His body was found in a field. His cause of death? Unknown. And no one's ever explained how James Conklin ended up dead in rural Ohio. November 15, 1981, Barberton, Ohio. James Howard Conklin was a typical teenager, athletic, friendly, with dreams of joining the military. That Sunday evening, he was last seen walking home from a friend's house. He never arrived. 3 days later, His body was discovered in a soybean field in nearby Clinton Township, just 6 miles from where he vanished. No shoes, no jacket, no signs of a struggle, just a young man lying in the cold. The coroner's report was inconclusive. No clear signs of trauma, no drugs in his system. His cause of death was officially listed as undetermined. Police investigated, but leads were scarce. James wasn't in trouble. He didn't run with the wrong crowd. There was no evidence of foul play, yet nothing about his death made sense. Why was he in that field? How did he get there? What happened in the hours after he left his friend's house? The questions piled up. The answers never came. James's family never believed this was just a random death. Some suspect he was picked up by someone he knew, someone who never meant for him to be found. Others wonder if he stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see, or if it was a prank gone wrong. But without a cause of death, it's hard to call it murder. And without witnesses, it's impossible to prove anything else. It's been over 4 decades. No justice, no closure, just a quiet grave, and the fading memory of a boy who never made it home. James Howard Conklin deserves answers, and someone out there still knows the truth. She was 25, a college graduate, an artist, a dreamer. She had plans, a future, a ride to Minneapolis, and then she vanished. Her body was found hours later, stabbed, discarded in a snowy ditch. 1 boot missing, no answers. No one ever saw her alive again, and no one was ever charged. This is the story of Mary K Schlais, and a mystery that still haunts the Midwest nearly 5 decades later. February 15, 1974, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Mary K Schlais was heading to Minneapolis for an art show. She had just completed her degree in fine arts and was eager to make her mark on the world. She didn't have a car, so she hitchhiked, something common at the time, especially for young people with limited means and big dreams. But somewhere along that 90-mile stretch of highway, her journey ended. A farmer discovered her body the next morning in a roadside ditch near Osseo. She had been stabbed at least 15 times. Her throat was slashed. She was fully clothed, but her purse and one of her boots were missing. There was no sign of a struggle at the scene. No blood trail, no weapon, just silence. Mary wasn't a drifter. She wasn't reckless. She was passionate about art, about travel, about people. She had studied at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and was planning to move to the Twin Cities for work. Those close to her described her as creative, trusting, and strong-willed. She'd made the decision to hitchhike that day, not out of carelessness, but necessity. It was the 70s. People did it all the time, but this time, she got into the wrong car, and that car took her to her death. Police from multiple jurisdictions got involved quickly. Tips came in. Some said she had been seen getting into a brown car on campus. Others reported suspicious activity near the highway, but nothing stuck. Her murder shocked the community, partly because of its brutality and partly because there was no motive. She wasn't robbed. She wasn't sexually assaulted. It felt like rage, pure, explosive rage. Years passed. The case grew cold. No arrests, no suspects. Just a grieving family, a buried daughter, and an open file. Over the years, theories came and went. Some suspected a serial killer. Others believed it was a crime of opportunity, an angry driver, a bad encounter on the road. But with no forensics and no DNA technology at the time, leads were weak. Witness accounts conflicted. Physical evidence was limited. The only consistent facts were grim. Multiple stab wounds, no defensive injuries, and a body dumped quickly and deliberately. It was clear whoever killed Mary knew how to disappear. Then came 2020, a possible break. A man named Thomas Eau Claire, an artist and convicted rapist, emerged as a potential suspect. He had died years earlier, but his background raised red flags. He had a history of violence. He lived in the area, and he reportedly owned a car similar to the one seen picking up Mary. Investigators re-examined the case with fresh eyes. Forensics were retested. Old evidence was digitized. But even now, no DNA link has been made public. No charges filed, just more questions, and a faint echo of justice waiting to be served. Mary's story is one of a life interrupted. A woman with talent, compassion, and promise, taken far too soon by a stranger's hand. Her case remains unsolved, but her name has not been forgotten. In an era where justice can be delayed but not denied, her family still waits. Investigators still hope, and the truth somewhere still waits to be uncovered. Someone out there knows what happened on that cold February day in 1974. And until they speak, Mary K. Schlais remains a haunting, unanswered question.